Here is part 2 of the fossilization videos. These are the different kind of processes of fossilization and kind of how fossilization can happen. So first up is preservation. This is where an organism or something gets trapped in a thing. For example, amber, like this. This is a pretty, not common one, but kind of well-known one. Other things can be like in ice. There has been examples of mammoth or prehistoric horse or prehistoric dog species found preserved in fossil. I mean, preserved in ice, oh my goodness. But this is still an example of fossilization. And this is kind of the only one where organic matter can be preserved, like soft tissue and organs and like even DNA sometimes, because they're just completely encased in the medium. And often what happens in these cases, especially with amber, is that the insect or something gets trapped in tree sap, likely while they're still alive, but then they get covered by it where the bacteria and like other animals and stuff can't get at them, so they are fully preserved as they were when they died in the amber. So these are the fossils that you get where the specimens inside are the most intact, and you can even get like biological matter from them. Next is premineralization or petrification, which is what happens when the organic matter such as wood, so petrified wood is a decently common fossil to find. This happens when the organic matter, such as wood, is submerged in very mineral-rich water, and then gradually the organic tissue is decomposed away and replaced by stone or other minerals, commonly silica. So basically, gradually, all of the organic material was just replaced by a mineral. There is also process called replacement, which is kind of the same but slightly different, if that makes sense. Another type of fossilization is a mold, also called a cast. This is where none of the actual fossil itself remains. For example, this used to be a seashell, but none of the actual shell is there. Over time, it got just kind of dissolved away, like the calcium carbide, calcium, whatever, that made up the shell got dissolved away, leaving just its imprint. Same thing you do in making like a resin mold, like you make a mold for the resin and then you take out the shape, whatever. But yeah, it's just a mold, so it's basically just the impression where something used to be, but there's nothing actually there anymore. This is pretty common with like sea creatures that have their hard shells preserved long enough for the fossilization to occur, but then they eventually get dissolved away anyway, leaving just an imprint in the rock. This is similar but slightly different with things like footprints. With footprints like dinosaur or human or whatever, the print gets pressed into the dirt or sand or whatever, and then a different mineral or like substrate or whatever goes into that and fills in the footprint, so preserving the impression in the mud. Basically, put your hand in, take it out, mud flows over top of it, but there's still the handprint there because the mud filled in the print before it got like worn away or whatever. So kind of the same thing, but slightly different. There's also the process of replacement, which is basically like the premineralization I talked about earlier. I'm not totally sure how different they are, but again, it's the same thing. This one is more like when a mold gets filled with other minerals. For example, there was an ammonite shell. The actual shell got dissolved away, but then the impression got filled with like mineral water that gradually crystallized and turned into quartz. I'm pretty sure that's what the difference is, but don't quote me on that. But again, premineralization and replacement are very similar. One is just the tissue is replaced with minerals. One, the cast is filled with minerals, I guess. And finally, we have compression. I did used to have a compression leaf fossil. I have no idea where it went. It's somewhere, maybe, but I did used to have one of these, and I'm kind of sad that it's gone. But this commonly happens with plants like ferns or pine needles and stuff like that. So basically, this is what happens when something like these ferns get covered in sediment and then compressed at very, very high pressures. There's lots of pressure like pushing down on it, and then it just leaves kind of a dark imprint after all the actual plant matter has decomposed away. So again, there's no actual fern in this, it's just an impression of the fern where it got really, really squished. So yeah, those are the processes of fossilization. I find that absolutely fascinating, and if unable to become a bog body, I would very much like to become a fossil instead.